I drank because of my anxiety, but what happened when I was drunk made my anxiety so much worse.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you feel like crap when you can't remember what happened.
Yeah.
And it ruined every relationship I had in my 20s.
Olivia, welcome to the show.
Hi. Thank you.
I start off every episode with gratitude. And for today's gratitude, you are the youngest sister of two of the previous guests of the podcast, Hannah Albrecht and Becca DeRoeck,
That's right.
which were episodes number 9 and number 3, respectively. And I want to say thank you for coming here today and sharing the insights similar to the way Hannah did as to how trauma can affect an entire family and in completely different ways. Because even though we have already had two very different stories of adverse experiences from Becca and Hannah, your story is also quite different to theirs.
Definitely. Yeah.
So I wanted to say I really appreciate you showing up today.
Yeah. Thank you.
So we are quite familiar with the story of your family moving when you were quite young. So you guys lived in Sweden and then you moved to the US. What age were you when you moved to California?
I was just about to turn 8. So I believe I turned 8 in California.
And what do you remember about the move?
It was a little traumatizing. We did not want to move. I don't think any of us did. It was definitely a learning curve. But I wouldn't say like a huge culture shock just because we lived in Silicon Valley where everybody was from somewhere else. It was way more of a culture shock moving to Texas than it was moving to California. I did get bullied a little bit, probably the only time I've been bullied in my life, because of my accent, and people were just like, "You sound weird." But I remember saying bye to all my friends. Yeah, I mean, it sucked in the beginning, but then I was young enough that I kind of was able to, you know, acclimate pretty quickly, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
How was your English when you moved?
Ooh. So my dad's American. So we actually mostly were exposed by watching Full House and like Mary-Kate and Ashley and stuff. Like that's kind of how I learned. We also had an English tutor at school, but I say that I spoke Swinglish. It wasn't great. I remember like the Pledge of Allegiance and like me telling the teacher like I don't know what that means, and she was like just like hold your hand over your heart and just say watermelon over and over again, and like nobody will notice. And I was like, okay. So yeah, things like that. And I did have to go to summer school for like a long time.
In terms of how childhood was for you, how would you describe your experience?
I look back at Sweden as like very idyllic. I think I've probably changed my mind about that as I've gotten older. I think I romanticized it a lot. I spent when I was 25, I went to New Zealand for a year, and it's because I hated the US and I was like, oh my God, I don't want to live here anymore. But then I moved there and I was like, oh my God, America's great. Like, and it kind of changed my
Interesting.
mind about Sweden because I was like, maybe my perspective was that of a 7-year-old and I'm not remembering it correctly. But yeah, we were like free to roam about. We had a forest behind our house. It was great. I do remember having severe anxiety pretty much my entire life. I have never really been able to sleep. Now I have to use sleeping pills and stuff, but when I was younger, like I would just lay awake all the time. Um, those are like the bad memories. I was also like very naughty at school and I would always do really bad things and then afterwards I'd be like, "Oh my God, what have I done? I'm going to be in so much trouble." Um, so yeah, it's weird cuz I'm like laid back and easygoing, but at the same time, like a nervous wreck. It's very weird.
Got it. At what age were you first aware of your anxiety?
So I actually didn't find out what it was until I was around 15. I just knew that my mind was not normal. I was probably four or five when I first became aware. I just had like an insane amount of stress about weird things. I had really intrusive thoughts, and it was always like directed towards my family, and it was always of a sexual nature. So I just thought, I didn't know what anxiety was. I just thought that I was like evil or gross or something. And yeah, that was really hard to live with. It got a lot worse after we moved. I think it triggered something by that big shift when you're that young. I think it just kind of like, yeah, I remember those 3 years in California were really bad when it came to my anxiety.
So there was an escalation
Oh,
of what you were
100%.
feeling. Yeah.
I mean, I always had it, but it got a lot worse.
And then when you talk about intrusive thoughts, were you able to talk to anybody about that at the time?
No, I like completely kept it in, which is not like me. I typically talk about most parts of myself, but like I was completely convinced that I was evil, and I was like, I don't want like I don't want people to I especially because it was all like a sexual nature. I was afraid that like my family was gonna be like, "What is wrong with you?"
Yeah.
and like, obviously I had like never heard about stuff like that. Nothing like that was talked about then. I don't feel like. So no, it was all bottled up inside for a very long time, and it ate away at me
Yeah.
for sure.
Do you have any concept of where those thoughts might have come from? Like what the origin might have been?
Um, it usually started like, oh my God, what if I had like this really horrible thought? And then I would think that thought, and then I'd be like, oh my God, you just thought that thought. So, like, you're like a piece of shit. Like, why
Yeah.
would you even think that? And then it would be like, why would any of this even come up in your head? Like, what's wrong with you? And then as I got older, I think I realized that like a lot of people have really weird thoughts, and they kind of come and go. And most people are like, well, that was weird. Whereas I would be like, no, there's like a reason you had that thought. And it would just like, I mean, I could not get it out of my head. But no, I don't know what like sparked it. I think probably, I mean, part of it was I don't know, this might be like TMI, but I I started my period when I was like 9. I hit puberty
Okay.
very early. And that's kind of when things got they were never like thoughts that I wanted to act on. It's not like I was like, "Oh my God, I have so many hormones," but I just think it was a lot at once, and my brain was kind of going nuts.
Yeah. And then something else that you mentioned just there was that you tended to hyperfixate on things. That was also a mainstay, right?
Yes. Um I would like just a simple thought, I would ruminate over that for, I'm not kidding, like 1 or 2 months. Like, I would just play it back in my head, and then the moment that I, like, reconciled with it and I was like, "Okay, just let it go," I would immediately have another horrible thought. It was just a cycle for, I mean, almost 15 years, I think.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a long time.
And then was OCD also a part of that?
Yeah, so I didn't find out until I found a really good therapist in, like, my early 20s that because I thought OCD only presented like in physical ways, like flipping a light switch a million times or putting on deodorant 8 times on each armpit or whatever. He actually told me I have obsessive compulsive disorder, but like of the thoughts.
Okay.
Like, I don't really know how else to say it. It was OCD in my brain, like ruminating and just not being able to like let go of a thought.
So there was no physical expressions of that. It
No,
was all
never.
mental.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, which is why it was so hard for me to like diagnose myself because I was like, this doesn't follow the pattern of what OCD should be.
Yeah. And then you had mentioned hitting puberty very early. And then also in Hannah's episode, she had talked about it being a very religious household and purity culture also being a very significant part of what was going on at the time. And from that celibacy, was that also something that you had exposure to as you were entering into your teenage years and you started to, have more of these kind of sexual feelings and sexual thoughts?
Well, I feel like now that you mention it, having gone to church my entire life, that might have been, it was always like being gay is wrong, masturbating is wrong, you shouldn't have any kind of thoughts about anything. So I wonder if even before I hit puberty, if that kind of stuck with me, because
Yeah.
there are still things to this day, and I have not been religious since I was probably 16 or 17 that still like fuck with my head.
If you're open to it, what kind of things?
I have a really weird thing with like masturbation. Like, I, it's always been like a deal breaker for me if like a boyfriend watches porn. I
Okay.
just like cannot. And it's partly insecurity, but it's also like that was so drilled into our heads that that's wrong. And yeah, I wish it didn't, but it still messes with me to this day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then in terms of all of this messaging that you were receiving around certain parts of sexual expression being wrong or bad, how did you then manage that as a teenager with these thoughts that you were having?
It was never really like I'm like horny. It was like I'm just having like really like deviant thoughts that are freaking me out. Um but that being said, we weren't allowed to date until we were 16. Um and pretty much when I turned 16, I got a boyfriend like right away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that tough before 16 to kind of manage that restriction?
Um yes, and I'm a very um I like am overly honest. I have a really weird guilty conscience. I think that might also come from religion or just who I am. My dad's kind of the same way and we're very similar. So like I would never have had like a secret boyfriend even though like I totally wanted one, but I couldn't like face my parents if I did that. I would feel like I have to like confess. And they never really made us feel that way. That was just kind of like an internal thing for me. But it was hard because of course there were boys, that I was interested in or they were interested in me. And I don't think there were a lot of people at our school that were like, I'm not allowed to date. So it was kind of weird to be like, I'm not allowed until like wait like 2 years and I'll be there.
Right. Yeah, I know Hannah had described the same thing of if a boy tried to talk to her, she would immediately pull the emergency brake and get out of the conversation. Did you have something similar to that?
I wasn't quite that intense about it, but I definitely would always be like, I'm not allowed. But I would like I would entertain it, but no, I knew that I was gonna wait till 16 because I had that guilty conscience and I didn't want to disappoint anyone
Yeah.
or have to lie because I'm just not good at it.
Right. And then at what age did you see your first therapist?
So, yeah, this kind of plays into like the anxiety and all those weird thoughts. So, I want to say I was 15 when I finally had like a weird breaking point. And me and my dad have always been really close. He's a bit more like emotional than my mom. So, there were moments when we'd sit down and talk. And I remember one day I was just like, I have these really I didn't go into detail, but I was like, I have these really disturbing thoughts. I've always had them. I always feel like there's like an elephant sitting on my chest. I feel like I can't like fully breathe. And he was like, I think you're explaining anxiety. And I think that was probably the first time I ever heard that word.
Yeah.
And as he explained it to me, because he did go through a time in his life where he had really severe anxiety, and I was just like, oh my God, like this is it. And it was so, it was such a relief because I was like, okay, I'm not evil. I'm not crazy. I'm just a very anxious person. Um, so shortly after that, my parents were like, okay, well, let's get you into therapy. So I saw my first therapist at 15 or 16. I can't fully remember.
Yeah. And then, do you remember, was that any specific modality of therapy?
I don't remember. I think uh I was so new to it. My parents were so new to it. I think it was just like generalized anxiety. And I remember, so another hard thing was it was in Georgetown, which like it's a very religious. I saw women every time because I felt like I'd be more comfortable. But what's funny is that the one I ended up with in my 20s that was like amazing was actually a man.
Right.
But yeah, so I saw one woman and I told her about all these thoughts because even though my dad was like, yeah, it's anxiety, I was like, okay, but like, why am I still having these thoughts? And immediately she's like, oh, you're suppressing like something sexual that happened to you when you were younger. And I was like, I'm not though. Like I just knew. Um, so I went a couple sessions with her and I was like, I'm not liking her because she wouldn't let it go. And like that's not something you want to hear at 16 when you're trying to like figure out what is going on. So then I saw a second one. She said the exact same thing.
Mm.
So I stopped seeing her and then I stuck with my third therapist for about a year. The worst parts of her was that she would actually gossip during our sessions. We only had 2 HEBs in our entire city, so like my boyfriend at the time who I would talk about worked at HEB and she would be like, "Oh my God, yeah," and like say his name. And
Oh,
then
wow.
yeah, and like he worked with his ex-girlfriend, she'd be like, "Oh yeah, I know her." And I'm like, "Okay,
Oh,
so
my God.
is this about you or is this about me?" So it completely turned me off to therapy and I was like, I'm done. And I just did not go back until I was maybe 21 or 22.
Did they give any sort of reason as to why they felt you might be suppressing a adverse sexual experience from childhood?
Because they said that if I'm having obsessive sexual thoughts, then that's what that must mean. Nobody talked about OCD. Nobody even mentioned it. And I think I focused on the sexual stuff because that's what really was like, that's what was making me feel like literally sick to my stomach. And so, I mean, maybe I focused on it too much and they were like, okay, this is obviously something that happened to her. But yeah, it wasn't. So,
And then, did it have any kind of effect on your anxiety or OCD in a positive way? I mean, it seems like it could have potentially made it worse.
yeah, it did not help. Again, I did. It's been so long, but I might have questioned it for a second. You know, I might have been like, "Oh my God, did something bad happen?" But I'm pretty self-assured with most things. I have a fairly good memory, and I was like, I just don't think that's it, you know? And I don't feel like I try to block anything out. And I felt like it was the easy answer for them, you know, right? Like
Yeah.
someone comes and is like, I have really weird sexual thoughts and I've had them since I was a kid. And it's probably easy to jump to, well, you were probably like molested.
Yeah, I mean, even with my own experience with repressed memories, and I know we had talked about my experience a little bit offline. Even just telling somebody that they have repressed memory, I don't know if that actually does anything. Like you don't just get access to what was blocked out just by somebody pointing it out. So even if that was true, that seems like a odd line for them to go down.
Yeah. And especially that it wasn't just one therapist, it was like all 3 of them.
Oh, the third one said it as
Yeah.
well. Okay.
Yeah. But I stuck with her because I was kind of like, I don't know if I feel like after I told her, like, no, that's not it, I think she let it go, whereas the other ones were like, no, like, this is what it is. But it is hard once you hear from three adults that are, this is what they do for a living. It does make you start to wonder. But I don't think I really latched onto it because I just didn't think that was an issue.
Yeah. Did you talk about that with your parents at all?
Mm, I definitely let them know that I hated the first therapist. I did not like the second one. Yeah, they know that they immediately went to like sexual trauma, and they said the same as me. They were like, I don't think that's it. Like,
Yeah.
it sounds like you just have intrusive thoughts. And whereas, someone who is not an anxious person can just kind of let it go, I couldn't.
And then as your anxiety started to get worse throughout your teens, alcohol enters the picture, right?
Yes. Yeah, so I kind of gave up on therapy, which probably wasn't helpful. But again, like, it left a bad taste in my mouth. I was like, I don't feel like I'm being heard. So yeah, I was probably about 19 when I had my first drink. I remember the first time I hated it. I was like, "Oh my God, I just want to be normal again, make it stop." And then I think the second time I drank, I was like, "Oh my God, this is like I feel like I found like the portal to heaven because my brain finally shut off and I was like, this is it. Like, I like this." And it was also like everybody else was drinking and I was really good in high school. I didn't go to parties, I didn't drink. I was the youngest, so I definitely had more freedom. I'm sure I had opportunities, but again, it's like I couldn't lie and I really had no desire, like drugs, alcohol, and none of it appealed to me. Um until basically I had that, second time of getting drunk. And unfortunately, like, I don't know if it was my age range or my friends, but getting blackout drunk was like very normalized. It was kind of like, if you're not getting blackout, what are you doing?
Right.
And that is when I would forget and kind of, it was like upwards trajectory of feeling really good. And then I would like wake up the next day and not know what happened.
Right. So there was these opportunities to have those kinds of experiences. You just had kind of avoided it before that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then how did that escalate for you?
It did quickly become kind of unsafe, especially because I was like a 19-year-old girl. Um, I was fairly, like flirtatious and stuff. But so I think the worst thing that happened, and it was something that happened very quickly after starting drinking. Oh, I guess I should mention that I had a boyfriend in high school. Because we were both still religious, we wanted to wait till marriage. We were together for 2 years. Like, not having sex was super important. Obviously, it had been, drilled into my mind both by religion and just like how we grew up. Like, you don't have sex before marriage. And I really didn't want to. Like, I thought of it as a very sacred thing. Um, and then once I started drinking, I remember I was out of high school, but I still kind of hung around like some high school people. I went over to one of my friends' houses and it was a bunch of guys. It was like three guys, and we were all hanging out. I knew them all from high school. And then we drank, and then I like have a memory of just pain and being on a couch and I knew what happened. I was like, "Fuck, well, I just lost my virginity, I guess." Um, and what made it worse was it was like obviously it only happened with that one person, but the group of guys the next day, they were like making jokes and it was like it was funny. And I was like, "Okay, I need to like get out of here." But I didn't want to go home. I believe I was still living with my parents. It was like right before I moved into my apartment. And I just like couldn't face them. So I went to a friend's house for like 3 days and I just cried a lot. And I was like, well, I waited 2 years with someone I actually loved only to lose it in like a moment.
And did you have any memory of that at all?
Yes. I remember it. I don't remember to consenting. I mean, I would call it a gray area because again, like I know that drinking definitely made me a little flirty. It probably gave people the wrong idea, but I don't remember ever being like, "Hey, let's have sex." I mean, I was a virgin. I wasn't going to be the one to push that, you know.
And then during this time, you're also working around alcohol a lot, right?
Yes. I was waitressing at the time. And again, kind of like with my friendships, it was like that was the thing to do. Every shift, it's like, do you want to go out afterwards?
And then with that, the drinking also escalated, right?
Yes. Um, I mean, we were going out like every single night, pretty much.
Right.
And it was like always something bad happened. And it was always I wish I could say like, "Oh, I just fell asleep," or whatever, but for some reason it's like I would always wake up and know like, "Oh my god, something happened again." Like eh, I always ended up in like a sexually bad situation.
Right.
And I think sometimes it was a gray area, but now looking back, I think there are times I know I was taken advantage of several times. I would probably call that the gray area because I don't know. I mean, there were times that the guys were also super drunk. But after like the Me Too movement and everything and like kind of how we like talk about stuff like that more now, I look back and I'm like, maybe it wasn't my fault for drinking too much because nothing like that would have happened if I had been in a room full of girls or gay guys, you know?
Yeah.
Like this only happened when I was surrounded by straight guys. And why does that happen every time?
And then you had also mentioned in talking about your experiences with therapy that you started working with another therapist in your early 20s.
Yes. So he was actually this Australian guy. He was specifically cognitive behavioral,
Yeah.
which was really good for me. The thoughts that I told you about earlier, I mean, they followed me into like 18, 19. They were always kind of there. And in cognitive behavioral, like he made me like face it like head on and like say the thoughts out loud. And it made me feel so gross, but he was like, it's gonna lose its power. The more you say it, the more you'll hear how stupid it sounds. And I mean, it worked. And I
Yeah.
wish I had really buckled down and done the homework. But I was busy drinking and kind of just having a good time and not, I mean, therapy's hard in general.
Yeah.
And at that age, I don't know that I was ready to like make serious changes. He tried to kind of help me, not with the alcohol part, because he wasn't like an addiction or substance abuse counselor. But he tried to help me like safely drink. He used to call it you should always have a wheelchair when you're going out, and he called my wheelchair like friends that I trusted.
Mm.
I don't remember why it was called a wheelchair. It's been a while, but basically like a safe spot to land, someone who's gonna make sure I get home safe. Um, and he also always said, have it already mapped out, like when you're leaving, when you're coming back, how you're doing that, in what car, at what time. Like you need to like have a plan or you're going to end up in these situations. And the really frustrating part was I drank because of my anxiety, but what happened when I was drunk made my anxiety so much worse
Yeah.
because, you know, I mean, you feel like crap when you can't remember what happened. Um Anxiety led me to drinking, and drinking led me down a really bad path of making really bad decisions. But it was very hard to stop because it made me feel nothing, you know?
Yeah.
And that was a good feeling.
Yeah. Just that ability to dissociate or disconnect.
Yes.
I'm also curious, did the intrusive thoughts get more severe as you got a little bit older?
Yes, in a different way. They presented differently. So since I was so, you know, kind of blasé, and that kind of goes back to how I lost my virginity. It went from this huge thing to I don't really care about sex anymore. It's not a big deal. Um, And I mean, I still feel like people should be able to go have sex, but the way that I was doing it was not in a safe way. Most of the time, I didn't even remember. I would just like wake up next to people. Um, so one of my main OCD things for, I mean, years was that I had like HIV. And when I went to that therapist, he was like, sexual thoughts, violent thoughts, and stuff like I have HIV are extremely common with people with OCD thoughts.
Yeah.
It's always like, what's like the worst thing that could happen? And because I wasn't careful, I mean, it wasn't that out of the realm of like possibility. So, uh, I mean, there was probably 3 years where I thought about it every single day.
Wow.
Yeah. And I had a really hard time going and getting tested because I would have a full on panic attack. But I still did, but it wasn't as often as I should have. And every time it was like traumatizing. I would not be able to sleep the night before. I'd be shaking when I went in there. I would always pay the extra 100 for like a rapid test because I just couldn't wait. And meanwhile, I'd go with my friends who were like, whatever, like I'll wait for my results. And meanwhile, I'm like losing my shit.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because there's that possibility that it confirms your worst fear, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. I'm also curious, just logistically, you had talked about this concept of the wheelchair and having a set plan mapped out before you actually went on a night out. If you were, having fun talking to somebody and it looked like maybe things might go a little further with this person, would a friend have to like grab you and take you home no matter what?
See, that quickly became an issue because she's still my best friend to this day, it, but I had a close friend who I always went out with, and she was my wheelchair a lot because she would get drunk too, but she wouldn't do that kind of stuff. And there were so many times where she would try to pull me away, and I'd be like, "Oh my God, like leave me alone." Like, and that's why I think there were definitely times where it was consensual, or I was so drunk that I was just like, "No, I want what I want." And I am very stubborn, and so she tried to be that for me. But she gave up after a while because she's like, "I'm not gonna fight you tooth and nail. Like, if you want to go with this guy, then go with this guy." But I would always wake up and be like, "Oh my God, what have I done?" And I mean, that's part of drinking. Your inhibitions go down, and you think you want something, and then you wake up and you're like, "Fuck, what have I done?"
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's also just a lot of responsibility for somebody at that age
Yes,
too.
it's not fair to put on another someone in their 20s for sure. Um, and told, I don't think I ever was like, "Hey, you're supposed to be my wheelchair." But I think I was like, "Hey, if you see me like slipping, can you help?" But again, it's like n- the choice should have always been up to me, and that's a lot to put on someone else,
Yeah.
especially someone else who's also drinking and, young.
Yeah. So you are in this cycle of going out, hooking up. Did you have any scares during that time?
I didn't until I was 23. And I was kind of seeing this guy. He like wanted to be boyfriend girlfriend. I was not interested. I was very much, I mean, despite what did happen to me, there were times that I just wanted to go like, be sexually fluid and like have my experiences. Okay, so I was like loosely seeing this guy, right? And we worked together, so like I knew him very well, but he already had a daughter. We were the same age, but he had a daughter really early. um and we were stupid. We just did something I had never done before and just didn't think about consequences, and I did get pregnant. And I ended up having an abortion. I knew immediately, like I saw the stick that said pregnant, and I was like, no, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And I didn't think that it would ever be that black and white for me, but it was like, no way. It was not the person I wanted to be with. He had so much drama with his, like, the mother of his child, and I didn't want to be a part of that. And I was 23, and I did not have my shit together, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Was that a conversation that you had with him?
With him?
Yeah.
Yes, he came with me and everything. Yeah. Um, and he was supportive. I think he was sad, but he was supportive. Um, and yeah, but I didn't think it was gonna be a big deal, but it fucked me up for a long time. Um, I have a hard time like really getting in touch with my feelings until I'm drunk, and then it's like I would just bawl my eyes out.
Yeah.
And for probably like 2.5 years after, every single time I drank, I would just sob and be like, "Oh my God, I can't believe I did this." And you know, there's also a lot of stigma around it, and
Yeah.
especially then, yeah,
And especially now.
yeah, actually all the time, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it's always been a pretty emotionally fraught thing ideologically, but then also the actual felt experience for
Yes.
someone who goes through that is it. I mean, it has to be incredibly traumatic.
Oh, it was horrible and painful, and yeah. I mean, I'm glad that he was there. It's not like I had to go through it alone. Um, but yeah, it doesn't make it any easier for sure.
Yeah. Was there something that was the tipping point for that grief kind of winding down, or did it just kind of naturally work through over time?
I think it kind of naturally worked through, especially like the older I got, the more mature I got. I was like, I 100% made the right decision. I mean, that child's life would have been very difficult. I was not financially, emotionally, any kind of stable. Um, so yeah, I think just realizing like, okay, like what you did it was fine. It was right at the time. It helped me get over it. I don't even think about it now. But I'm about to be 31, so I think time heals everything. It got easier over time.
Yeah. And then how did your drinking progress through your late 20s?
Um, it pretty much stayed the same. It's like I never got out of that, like, getting blackout drunk is totally normal.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, I still am not 100% great with my drinking. I mean, it's gotten tons better. I I'm a mom now, I have to be more responsible, but I don't think I fully hit that point until I got pregnant with my son.
Yeah.
And then it was like, okay, you got to stop fucking around. You need to like figure this out. I was in a relationship. He's my husband now. Um and I was just like, yeah, you can't have these situations where you go out and you don't know what happened. Like this is now a family that you can ruin. And just having something to live for. I think for a long time I didn't feel like I had much to live for. I was so stuck in my head all the time. It was hard, like day to day was just hard. When I say I felt like I couldn't breathe, I mean like I fully mean that. It was like I just couldn't have like a moment of peace. So it was hard to not just try to like find something to shut my mind off.
Right. Yeah. So the anxiety is also a constant through your late 20s too,
Oh,
right?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. It still is. I mean, it weirdly, I don't know what happened. There were 2 years in middle school where my anxiety went away. Like
Mm.
I woke up one morning, I took a deep breath cuz usually like I would wake up and I'd be like half awake and I would have this like kind of euphoric feeling and I would wake up and it's like boom, something would just like hit my chest and that was my everyday. And I remember like chasing that like euphoria of not quite being awake and like is this what it feels like to be normal? Like to not have that feeling of doom and like anxiety. And I remember just like being so happy waking up every day, being able to like take a deep breath. And I wonder if it was hormonal maybe because then I started the ninth grade and that's when a lot of my hormones kicked in too. And then my anxiety was immediately back. All it took was one thought, and it was like about death. I started ruminating and obsessing about dying and how terrifying that would be. And then I've never had like a deep, clear breath ever since then.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
How did you meet your now husband?
Me and my boyfriend at the time, we were friends with him and his wife. Um, and then, we were friends for a few years and then kind of like trickled off. And then I moved to New Zealand and he messaged me and was like, "Oh my God, did you fucking move to New Zealand? Like what happened?" And he had gotten divorced at that point because he left the religion. And yeah, we just like never stopped talking after that. We talked, and I was really lonely in New Zealand. That was a whole trauma in itself. But we spoke every single day until I moved back. And I thought it was just a friend thing, but it ended up progressing. And, now we have a 3-year-old.
But I'm curious, what were the circumstances around you going to New Zealand?
So my mom's dad is from New Zealand. So my mom's the one who's from Sweden, but she had never met her dad, but she found out when she was older that she had a half sister. And they still live in New Zealand. So she got really close to her. She went to visit a few times. We went to visit when I was younger. And her half sister had a daughter, so my cousin came to visit Austin, and she was like, "Hey, it'd be really cool, like, if you ever want to come, like, live here on, like, a work visa, like, my house is open, whatever." And I was kind of like, no, like, I'm happy here. But then I think I was 25. I think I had another boyfriend, and he broke up with me for the same reason that I've been talking about. I was getting drunk and doing dumb things, and um, I think it was the first time I'd ever been broken up with, and I was just like, I need to get out of this country. I lived like close to downtown Austin. I would run into my exes all the time, and I was just like, it's weird because Austin's big, but it's not.
Yeah.
Like, you see people all the time, and I was like, no, I need to get out of here. So yeah, I just moved away for a year.
Was there any part of that looking for a fresh start?
I knew I wasn't gonna like stay there, but yes, I needed maybe more of a recharge than a fresh start, because no part of me was like, I'm moving away forever. But I was like, I need to like be away from everything and kind of like figure my shit out.
Yeah.
And although I did not enjoy my time there, it was very lonely. I didn't get along with the people. I didn't understand the sense of humor. Mm, Um, it was a really good, like, it helped me be alone and be okay being alone for like the first time in my life. I've always been surrounded by friends, or I've always had a boyfriend. And this was the first time that I was like, okay, this is what it is to be alone. And I'm actually content and I'm okay. I called my parents 6 months in and I was like, I need to come home. I hate this. And they were like, stick with it, like, just finish this. You're gonna pat yourself on the back that you went the whole year. And I'm glad I did, looking back, because it challenged me and I'm a different person for it. So
Yeah, I'm curious, in what way did that experience change you?
I mean, definitely the learning to be alone. I think I always had a fear of being alone because I didn't want to be stuck in my thoughts. Like, it was that anxiety, and like if I was always distracted, I wouldn't have to think. And I was always afraid that like those thoughts would come back, because I mean, my obsessive thoughts changed over the years, but I was afraid that they were gonna change back to those like really like sexually weird thoughts that I had when I was younger. So it changed me in the sense that, like, I mean, the cousin I was living with, she was in her 40s. I was 25. We had different lives. We would go out together on the weekends, but I mean, during the week I was alone. I had to work 3 jobs because New Zealand is insanely expensive. Um, and I think which it's crazy. I made the least amount of money I ever have, but I was, for the first time in my life, able to grow a savings account. And I think it's because I never did anything.
Yeah.
I just worked, and I don't know. I finally realized that like stability is important, and
Yeah.
I don't think I even had a moment to stop when I lived here to think about that.
Yeah.
I had a lot of time to sit and think
Yeah. I
and
mean,
get to know myself, I guess.
yeah. It seems like that was just a constant cycle that you're in of just kind of chaos and kind of uncertainty for
Yes.
most of your teens and 20s. And the opportunity to kind of start fresh and be in a place where nobody knows you and you don't have any of these prior perceptions or I don't know, you don't have to fulfill anybody's expectations of you. Must have been a really nice reset for you.
Yes. I think actually that was a big part of it. It was like nobody had any preconceived notions, and I didn't have preconceived notions about anyone because I didn't know anyone. Yeah. The first 3 months were amazing. I was like, oh my God, it is so beautiful. And it is. And I was just happy to not be here. But then, once like normal life sets in and you have to go to work and yeah, but it's made me, another way that it helped me grow was it made me actually appreciate here and to stop idolizing Sweden. Because I was mad at my dad for a long time for like making us move. And then I moved back and I was kind of like, thank you for like having us move to the US. Like, I like it. I understand now what it's like to live in a very small place. Um, it's a different feeling. And people didn't like me because I was American, and Trump had just become president, so they were talking a lot of shit. And I was like, look, I had nothing to do with that, but there's not much you can do, there's a stigma, and yeah.
Yeah. So then you are back in the US, and how long are you back when things start to blossom with your now husband?
I mean, we started hanging out like immediately as soon as I came home, and I mean, funny enough, like the how it started was we both got drunk and you know had sex, and then I remember being like, oh no, I just want to be friends, but like we were so close, we hung out all the time, and he was just like respectful and not pushy, and then something switched. I think we were like out, and an ex-girlfriend texted him, and I got really mad, and I was like, wait, I think I like you. Like it took that for me to be like, oh crap, like okay, obviously I like you. And then yeah, we just started dating from there. And we had only been together a year when I got pregnant with our son.
Yeah.
But it wasn't that scary because I had known him, for a long time, and I knew what kind of person he was. And yeah, there was like no doubt in my mind, like we're having this baby.
Yeah. Was that something you guys bonded on in terms of both having grown up very religious and then kind of leaving that behind?
Yes. I think we first bonded about anxiety, which is crazy because he would tell me like about how he was feeling, and this was when we were messaging in New Zealand, and I was like, "What you're telling me sounds like a lot like anxiety." And you know, growing up, his religion was a little more like a cult, and growing up how he grew up, like it's just pray about it. Nobody talks about mental health. Um, so yeah, that's kind of how we bonded initially, and then I heard his whole story. I don't even know if I knew he was a Jehovah's Witness when we were friends earlier, because he wasn't supposed to be hanging out with us. They're not supposed to hang out with worldly people. So
Oh, I didn't know that.
yeah.
Okay.
So I think we didn't know because he didn't tell us. So yeah, I wouldn't say we bonded over it because his religious trauma is so much worse than mine. So like what I grew up with, it kind of like it's not even, you can't even compare the two.
Yeah.
There's not much space for my stuff when like his family literally is like, don't ever speak to me again.
Yeah.
They threw him a party, and it was like a goodbye party, like we're never talking to you again.
Wow.
Yeah. It
That's so wild.
But yeah, no, his I'd say we bonded more about anxiety, and we both had trouble with drinking and stuff, so we bonded over that too.
Yeah.
Trying to make changes and, you know.
Yeah. And then with the birth of your son, that was about 3 years ago, right?
Yes.
And what was that experience like?
Um, it was my pregnancy was great. It was super easy. Um, yeah, no morning sickness, nothing like that. Um, but then I went to get induced because they give you that option now once you're like 39 weeks. They're like, hey, do you not want to be pregnant anymore? Like, we can push this along. Um, I wish I hadn't done that because I think I was in like the whole labor part for less than 10 hours, which is very quick. Like everything happened super fast. His heart rate started going down like really fast. The cord was wrapped around his neck. I was supposed to have an emergency C-section, but some weird like motherly thing came over me and I was like, "No, I need to like have this baby like vaginally." I don't know what came over me and they're like, "Okay, well we can flip you over and try to move him around." And they did. But it was like time to push cuz we needed to get him out because of
Yeah.
his blood pressure or whatever. Um and I don't know if you know what forceps are.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had to use those to pull him out. So he came out, they put him on my stomach and he was like gray and he wasn't crying. And they were like, "Who wants to cut the umbilical cord?" And then, like, before I knew it, they snatched him away. And they called some kind of code, and like a bunch of people rushed in, and they had to help him breathe.
Mm.
And so with the forceps, it actually gave me like a severe hematoma and bruising. Down there, I had to have a catheter for 2 months, I think, with a newborn baby. Yeah, the actual labor was that's some trauma in itself.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was really
absolutely.
I couldn't sit. I couldn't go to the bathroom. Like it was really rough. And then he got jaundice, so we had to go back to the hospital and the whole like him not breathing. I was not even the first person to see my son. Like I saw him on a picture while they were trying to like get him breathing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But he didn't go to the NICU or anything. Um, I think everything just happened so fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did he have any side effects from that experience?
So, I mean, we found out we had suspected for a while, but we found out this past year he was diagnosed with autism.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's linked. There's so much they still don't know about autism. It does run in my family, or not run in my family. I have a first cousin who's autistic, and my husband recently found out that he also has a first cousin's child, who's autistic.
Yeah.
So, you know, you never know what it was. I sometimes think that it's because he wasn't breathing for a while, but it can also be genetic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I blame myself a lot because I was like, I should have just done the emergency C-section and maybe none of this would have happened. But
Right.
you just do what you do in that moment.
Yeah, I mean, there's no way you could have known that at
No.
the time, right?
No.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm also curious, did you have any sort of postpartum following the birth?
I had pretty intense. I don't know if I would say postpartum. I pretty much into my second trimester, I completely lost my sex drive. It's still not fully back, and it's been like 3 years. And I went from being, having a pretty high sex drive, I think, to like nothing, which I don't know if that was part of postpartum or if it's because I was on Zoloft. Or it's also like I have this weird thing that I'm like a mom now, and I gained a lot of weight also after having my child. I'd never really been heavy, so that'll also affect you,
Yeah.
Like you don't feel like a sexual being because you're a mom, and then on top of that, you gain weight, and on top of that, I think it was my medication. And that's what was so frustrating is I finally found a medication that worked for me. It completely got rid of my OCD thoughts. I do still have anxiety every day, but then it ruined other parts of my life. And it feels like I can't win.
Yeah, there's like a couple of angles I'm curious about here. So you had mentioned your drinking going down as you entered into motherhood, and then also that begs the question of how are you then managing your anxiety because you did not have this escape.
Right.
But then also, when did the medication start, and also what is Zoloft, like what does that treat?
So I had kind of tried a bunch of different medication, like maybe in my mid-20s. I think because I was drinking so heavily, they probably weren't working, and also like I just didn't really stick with it. Zoloft I chose during my pregnancy, because well, I no longer had the crutch of drinking. Obviously, you can't drink when you're pregnant, and my anxiety was so high that I told my OB, I was like, look, like I I don't know if it's dangerous to be on medication, but like I am afraid that this baby is gonna have complications if I don't calm down. So they were like, well, Zoloft is the safest thing you can take. It was between Zoloft and Lexapro.
Yeah.
And I think I had tried Lexapro in the past. It did nothing. I have a really high tolerance for medication, unfortunately. So, like, a lot of things don't work for me.
Mm,
Or I have to take, like, the highest dose.
yeah.
So, yeah, I started Zoloft. And when you're pregnant, the highest you can go is 100 milligrams. And it just kind of worked for me. Like, it really helped. But the reason I chose Zoloft was because that's one of the two medications you can have while you're pregnant.
Yeah.
And then as soon as I had the baby, then I could bump up to 200 milligrams, and it was even better. But now I've been on a medication journey. I have probably tried like every anxiety medication, SSRI, SNRI. Right now, I'm on something that is actually meant for people with what is it called? Seizures. It's an
Oh,
anti-seizure medication. And it is the best thing that's ever worked for me, which is crazy. But it took me 3 years, yeah, since I had my son and two different psychiatrists to get to where I am now.
yeah.
Um, and I had been on the medication I'm on right now, I had been on before, but there is a black label on it, because you can get a rash that's deadly.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's like very intense. You have to like taper up and taper down, and if anything goes awry, it can be super serious. So I did the first time I took it develop a rash, but it wasn't like the rash as far as I could tell, but when that happens, you have to get off of it immediately and go to the hospital. So that's what I did, and they were like, "Well, we can't rule out that it wasn't that. It probably isn't, but it could be." Um so I stopped it, and then I just recently got back on it now. So it works really well for my anxiety. My sex drive is coming back, but there's always that fear of like, am I gonna get that rash?
Yeah.
that yeah.
Yeah, that's scary.
Yeah. It's like with the medication, it's constantly like it's a catch 22.
So the Zoloft is cratering your sex drive,
Yes.
and this becomes relevant because of the sequence of events that happens about 2 years ago, right?
Um exactly. So because my sex drive was so low, we were only having sex like once a month, if even that. Um, and yeah, so there was one time we had sex. We used a condom broke, and like immediately I was pregnant.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God. I think he must have been 1.5 at the time because he's almost 3.5. And um, yeah, but me and my husband were just like, okay, well, we're gonna make it work. At least they'll be close in age and they can be friends and whatever. Um, and so we went in for the first ultrasound, and of course, I had had one with my son, so you kind of know the second time what to expect, and just the OB kind of was like, and then she like left the room for a little bit, and I could see that like things didn't quite look right, and she came back and was like, okay, like like the baby's not measuring where it should be, come back in like 2 weeks or something. And I think they were saying that I was 6 weeks pregnant at that point. And so I think it was like 2 weeks. I came back, still nothing from what I can remember. The timeline's blurry now, especially I had so many doctor's appointments. All I remember was I was 10 weeks and I had announced it on Facebook. And I know you're supposed to wait 12 weeks, but I was like, it's my second kid. Like, also, I just didn't think I was going to have a miscarriage. I don't know. That's not really something you think is going to happen. And like very shortly after that. So on Christmas, I announced it. In January, I started bleeding, cramping, to the point where I could barely walk. And in the beginning, you don't have that many ultrasounds. So like, I didn't really know what was going on. I figured that things were going to work themselves out because my son was also measuring small in the beginning and it all ended up being fine. And there was just one day where like, I was bleeding and like I was in so much pain I couldn't walk. So I went to the hospital and they were like, yeah, like things don't look good. But it's too early for us to do anything. And I was like, well, what do you mean? Like I'm 10 weeks and this baby doesn't have a heartbeat. At this point, there should be a heartbeat. There should have been a heartbeat already. And they're like, I know, but like we can't legally do anything. You're going to have to follow up with your OB. So I went to my OB that like the next day because I think this happened over the weekend. And they told me the same thing. And they were like, well, maybe we got the date wrong. Like maybe your last period wasn't when you thought it was. And I told them, I was like, look, I don't have a sex drive. I know when the last time I had sex, it is so infrequent that I know.
Right.
And
for sure.
Yeah. And they were just like, I know, but we like can't take your word for it. I could lose my license. It just seems like you have the date wrong. Because if it's like 6 weeks and there's no heartbeat, it's not like the end of the world. Like there's still time for, or it could just be measuring so small that they can't like.
Got it.
I don't know the logistics, but all I knew was I am 10 weeks pregnant and there is no heartbeat. So yeah, I had to wait about 3 weeks, and I just kept asking them. They can give you a medication that just kind of passes it, and they can also give you pain medication, but they would not give it to me. And then finally, like
again, because they think it's a lot earlier in the
right,
term. Yeah.
because they like couldn't take my word for it. So they were like, you just have to wait a little bit longer to where we can like get the okay that it's been long enough now. And so I remember my last ultrasound, like I was begging them because I was like, look, my husband can't get off of work. I can barely care for my 1.5-year-old. I can't get off the couch. I can't carry him. I'm bleeding. I've been pregnant before. Like I know what's going on. And they were like, okay, well, we're gonna check with like our like head sonographer and get back to you and maybe see if we can like get this done. Because my doctor even said, I believe you. There are protocols that we have to follow. And that night, before I got an answer from the sonographer, I had a miscarriage in the bathtub at home.
Yeah, I can't imagine having to go through that alone and at home.
Yeah, and trying to care for like a very young child. Yeah, that was rough. And my husband's work knew that I was miscarrying, and they still didn't give him any time off.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Even between that 6-week mark and miscarrying at home, you were also bleeding and cramping that entire time, right?
Yes, which I thought, is that not enough of an indication? And of course, it was like, well, some women do bleed like in the beginning, or some women do cramp. And I'm like, but there's like so many different factors that are all telling us this is not a viable pregnancy. I felt like, at least. And I think they agreed, but I feel like their hands were tied.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's so tragic and unfortunate.
Yeah, and it's like on top of that, you are dealing with losing a child, but I couldn't even focus on the emotional part of it because I was just like, at that point, I was like, please just make this pain stop and do whatever you have to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you have the similar experience with the miscarriage as you did when you didn't have the first child?
Um, you know, crazy enough, not really. Um, the abortion felt like my fault, and I guess it depends who you ask, but some would say it was my fault because it was a choice. The miscarriage, what bothered me way more with the grief was that I didn't feel heard. Um, I felt like they were putting an unviable and unborn child over someone who is a mother to an actual living being, and it was very terrifying. So that was more what caused me trauma. It was more of the like, I don't think I'll ever get pregnant again because if I have to go through something like that again, I don't think I can.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And also like, I mean, this sounds horrible, but we were not planning on having a kid at the time, so
Yeah.
it wasn't like. I think if I had miscarried with my first child, I think that would have been absolutely heartbreaking, but it was not the right time. But I mean, it still sucks. But again, I was way more upset with how it was treated than with what happened.
Yeah, but I mean, just to have your safety and physical health jeopardized.
Yes,
Yeah.
that pissed me off.
Yeah.
It made me angry and sad with how things are, and unheard. It's like another time where you just feel like a woman who's not being heard.
So after all of this journey and kind of like ups and downs, how would you appraise kind of like the current lay of the land as it relates to how you feel day to day?
I am a work in progress for sure. Um, I'm really proud of how I have fixed the drinking issue. I think, like I said before, it's helped having a child, especially one with special needs. So, like, he is in a bunch of therapies. I need to show up for him. It's not just about me anymore. Um, so, like, am I completely sober? No. But do I do the things I used to do? No. And I don't drink the way that I used to. The anxiety still very much a big part of my everyday life. But the OCD thoughts are gone. But the times that I did switch up my medication when I was going through that journey the last 3 years, it was like instantaneous. It's like as soon as I got off of medication, those OCD thoughts were like bam, like right back in my head.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm at a point where I am managing my anxiety. It helps not to have those OCD thoughts. I feel like anxiety is such a big part of me. It's almost part of my personality that like I know how to manage the day to day. It was the OCD stuff that really made it, I couldn't even work sometimes cuz I just could not get out of my head.
Yeah.
I do hope to get into therapy. We've been looking into therapy for my husband. It is insane how hard it is to find a therapist that takes your insurance.
Yeah.
Like crazy hard. And if you go to it without insurance, it's insanely expensive.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've been wanting to go back to therapy for a long time, but it's just sometimes not financially feasible.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that is a very common sentiment that is expressed on this podcast.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And, like it's also difficult because with the pandemic and the mental health crisis that caused, a lot of therapists are just completely booked out right now.
Yes.
We are under-resourced.
Yep.
Yeah.
And if not, then, because of COVID, and it's understandable, a lot of people went to telehealth, and I think they were like, hey, this kind of works. That doesn't work for me. Like, I need to be face to face. I'm glad there are those options, but yeah, if I'm gonna like be that vulnerable and open, I'd want to be face to face, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, I mostly feel the same way.
Mhm.
my current relationship with my therapist is telehealth, and we had started in person.
Okay, that helps.
It
Yeah.
definitely helps, but I think my preference would still be for in-person therapy. I think just, I mean, even, you know, to go down a step and with this podcast, like I much prefer to have the conversations in person because I feel like if you are going to have that relationship with a therapist, something gets lost in that connection when it's done over the internet. So
Yes.
I definitely think doing the in-person experience is far superior, but then also another unfortunate part of this is that a lot of therapists have not decided to renew leases on offices because that's just another overhead and expense.
Exactly. And that's kind of what was hard about going to telehealth, because I mean, it's happened to a bunch of companies too. They realize like, okay, well, it's worked from home, so let's just do that. We'll save money. And yeah.
Yeah.
And I totally agree with you. It's not the same connection when it's not in person.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, Olivia, I really appreciate you showing up today and giving us the entire 360-degree view of how trauma has permeated throughout your family. And I really appreciate the courage that you showed in telling your story and the honesty and transparency. I think a lot of people will get a lot from this conversation.
Good. I hope so. And yeah, I was really nervous, but I'm glad I did it.
You did awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Olivia.
All right. Thanks.